experience around cloud, some of the best practices that you can do when you're starting or moving projects to the cloud, and also, most importantly, actually, is cloud just public cloud? Let's find out. So with me today, I have Sarah Lean. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
I've also got this esteemed Darren Swift.
Hi, thank you for having me.
See you. And also needs very little introduction, Stu Miniman.
Hey, Kurt, great to be with you again.
Great to see you all. So we're in a panel. We're going to keep this lively. By now, most of you in the audience have seen a few different shows. This is going to be a little bit different to everything else because it will be chaos in itself. We have a general idea of where we're going with this, but bear with us because there's a lot of experience here and you're going to learn some really interesting things. So I'm going to start this off by cloud is really easy, right? You just press buttons and it's already deployed to best practices and your life is easy, right? You know, what was
that? Absolutely not. I actually think that's one of the major misconceptions that I see a lot of customers that I speak to think that cloud is dead easy. Now, cloud isn't hard, but it's somewhere in the middle. And I think if you're looking to go to the cloud, you need to start your journey really well. You know, that planning, that discussion, that education piece is super important to avoiding the chaos that can happen if you don't do that. I think I've got some horror stories from customers. I had one customer who they actually spent their whole first year budget in 6 months because they just let everybody do whatever they wanted, let like virtual machines be the biggest size that anybody wanted, let them run 24 hours. You know, they had no planning, they had no guidance at all, and people were just deploying things left, right, and center, and they ran out of budget within 6 months, and they were very scared, and that was very much a cloud chaos situation for them.
I think that's like, sorry, go ahead, Stu.
No, please. Yeah.
I think that's like really common. So I've heard stories like that whereby, you know, there's been a project that's come along, whether it's infrastructure, analytics, PaaS, SaaS, whatever it is, and they've got into cloud full steam without fully understanding it, and then it's given them a bad experience of cloud, and then they almost backtrack at that point, and then are almost bringing their stuff back on premises because they've not experienced cloud to its full potential.
Yeah, so I was going to say, look, you know, I do have the answer. KubeCon's coming up. It is Kubernetes is the answer. Kubernetes, a little bit of magic, and you know, hey, everything is solved. No, of course not. Just what Swifty and Sarah were saying is, you know, there's so many paths you can go wrong on. You know, it's super easy to overspend. You know, what did all of us learn in the last year is the best laid plans of what we're going to do for the year or the quarter could go completely sidewise. You know, whether it is, you know, a pandemic hit or, oh, that person that really ran the project, all of a sudden, you know, they left for some reason, and you have to deal with it. So, you know, understanding, you know, what happens, you know, engaging all the people, you know, I so much in my career, it's been like, you know, how do you get people to communicate, not just be in their silos? We've had the whole, you know, DevOps, DevSecOps, you know, for a lot of years there to get us all together. Let's have a plan. Let's understand what we need to do. And, you know, let's, you know, you're not going to stop chaos because, you know, entropy always will rule, but, you know, you can hopefully, you know, learn to live with it a little bit is, you know, what we said, especially, you know, I live in a lot of the open source communities. You never know what's going to come out next month. And, you know, let's roll with it.
Long live open source. I absolutely love it for that reason. But yeah, it is great when you're trying to make a plan and just, I think the best thing about it is you can influence it to go towards that plan, can't you, as well, which is great. So that's awesome. But why do you think, you know, we always laugh about cost, and I've seen the same as Sarah. I have seen people spend their budgets like that. Why do we think it happens in the first place? Is it just they're just not educating themselves on, okay, you know, just doing the bare basics of, well, a VM costs me X per hour and I times that by 31 days and that's all it will cost? Is it hidden costs, or is it just where is it they go wrong?
I actually think it's the lack of planning. It's the lack of understanding, especially if they're doing a migration. If they're migrating away from their current situation to the cloud, they don't sit down and actually think about how they move that properly. They don't sit about and figure out, is this a 24/7 application? Do we need high availability, reliability, performance? or is it not actually that mission critical and we can actually downscale it? And they also don't think about the architecture design. Do we need to just lift and shift, or do we have to re-architect for the cloud optimize it? All of those kind of buzzwords they forget, because as techies, we love to just hit the button and go, right? You know, how many times have we all deployed a service or tried something shiny and new and went next, deployed it, and then went, oh, that's not right. And you have to undo it, and then you have to go and read the documentation. So I think that's, you know, it is that read the documentation, learn about it, and then start to deploy. Folk are desperate to get hands-on with the tech.
Yeah.
As a techie, I can completely understand that. But sometimes you have to sit in like 6 months worth of meetings to actually figure out how to deploy that tech. You know, it is the reality. I think that for me, that's where I see. I don't know where
yes.
the guys.
So let me just build on that. One, I'd like to blame the cloud providers a little bit. It is not easy. You know, for all, I read the architecture, I put things in thing, but when that monthly bill comes,
products and services.
you know, when that monthly bill comes, sometimes it's a surprise. You know, it's like, you know, I'm really glad that, you know, my kids weren't old enough back when cell phone bills used to sometimes be a big surprise. When they got their own funds and everything, it's like unlimited plan. I don't care what it is, because otherwise I don't want to be surprised by that. And that's one of the biggest challenges with cloud is you run into these surprises. Oh, I did something architecturally, and oh, I hadn't realized that the logs all of a sudden were building up and making me a cost. Oh, wait, I moved things a little bit too much because architecturally we thought that made sense. And, you know, big bad egress fees caused us huge amount of issues. Been, you know, lighting up the internets lately, talking about some of the, you know, alternatives today to remove the cost of egress fees. So some of that thing, you know, used to be an enterprise, you paid for something and you understood what it is. You know, the cloud gives us wonderful flexibility, and that's really nice. But a lot of times when I get that bill, I'm not sure what it's going to be. And do I throw resources at it? You know, do I bring consultants in? You know, it's a challenge to kind of really understand that. And we are making progress. You know, it shocked me. I remember the first time I went to like Amazon reInvent like 7-8 years ago, they're like, oh, hey, we're going to put out this tool and find out how much stuff you've been wasting. And I'm like, in my career, if we went to a customer and said like, hey, you've been wasting a lot of resources and overbuying in the last 2 years, they would have shot us and kicked us out of the building. And now it's like, oh, thank you for letting me know I was wasting some stuff, and I'll be better going forward. I'm like,
might have to get marketing to package that up
world.
into a nicer phrase.
Yeah, exactly that. But you raised a really interesting point, right? There is a different model, because back 5 years ago, even before that, you know, when you were doing the on-premise sort of renewals and stuff, you were buying kit for 3, 4, 5 years in advance, then hammering your vendor for the best discount you could possibly get. And as an architect, if you had done your job well, you would get to the end of 3, 4, or 5 years and you would be at 100% utilization because you nailed it. But you would be screamed at because any kit at 100% is on fire. Right? There is no time you want to be at 100%. But you have to evolve your thinking, don't you? Because all that wasted utilization, if you're not matching your utilization curve, you're not affording yourself the ability to actually make savings. And you can make savings. And I think that's where a lot of people thought, oh, we will just, you know, to coin a phrase that's been overused, lift and shift into the cloud and it will solve all our problems. And the case of that was, well, no, actually, it's probably a little bit more costly and you don't have the skills, and you're certainly not skilled enough in the observability side of things, and you probably don't know how to secure it. But then the reality was actually a lot of projects, and the most successful projects, and I'm going to say this just to be contentious, are the greenfield projects, the actual cloud native projects. They're the ones that benefit the most, because you can start there and go, yeah, we're going to start with a bit serverless because that bit doesn't need to be on 24/7, or perhaps we can't even predict what our users are going to be doing. And that is great. And we're going to start there because it will afford us that time until we get to something that is predictable. And I think cloud really excels at the unpredictable side of things, but comes double-edged sword, because if you get that really wrong, then that's going to hit you in the wallet.
Yep. And I think even just my tiny story here about reading the documentation is I was setting up a file share in Azure to offload some big video files I didn't need on my PC anymore. And when you set up an Azure storage account, you get 2 tiers. You get hot or cold. Now, cold's cheaper than the hot. No surprise there. But if you actually read the documentation, they say if you're transferring a big load of files into that Azure storage account at the very start and then never going to access it again or not going to access it for 6 months, they say turn it on to hot, because it'll be cheaper to actually upload your data and then flip to cold rather than have it cold, because you'll pay more because the transactional data is actually more. So when you read the documentation, you actually figure out it's cheaper to go hot and then flip to cold once you've transferred it in. So those little nuggets really help when you're architecting and knowing what you're doing. Of course, you've got to remember to go and switch it back to cold once you've done the transfer. But, you know, that's where I think that reading the documentation, reading that small print, understanding where the costs are. And as techies, we don't do that. We read about, you know, the IOPS and the performance and CPU and RAM and all that kind of stuff, but we forget about the cost. And I think we have to learn about how a service is charged so that we can architect correctly going forward.
In a previous life, in a previous job, I had to do a lot of, we used to archive out to cloud, and I had to consume all the cloud vendors' documentation around that. So I feel your pain on that, especially around how long you can leave it there before you can even place a delete marker on it, X, Y, and Z. There was like no clear-cut answer, and what we ended up with was a ginormous Python script where you just entered stuff at the start and then it spat you out a solution because it's the only way to get people like commonly going to this model. But yeah, that's part of the tooling that you have to have around cloud now, right? You need to have that thought process.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, you leaned into quite a nice section there, really, around performance, and that's always been a dark art, right? Whether it was on premise, when it was in the cloud or anything, I think it's one of the misunderstood areas where you can lose a lot of time and obviously incur a lot of cost in this new model where you are paying for accessing data, for possibly even reads, writes, cold fetches, hot fetches, this whole new thing that's never really existed before, because it was always like, well, it was just on a box that was shared between everyone, and if something went on fire, it was just a project cost that sorted it, sort of thing. Whereas now it's like, oh, hang on, this is directly attributed to our cost center, and we need to really understand the ins and outs of this. But what sort of things would we sort of see people that we're working with to, trying to use to understand performance? Because I have loved that question, and I bet everyone here has asked that, to go, so what do you have today? And most people can't answer that. So where do we start?
Just for one phrase that I've been using from like a security perspective is when people tell me, you know, they want to start securing things in the cloud or things. My favorite phrase at the moment is, you can't secure what you don't know you have. And it's the same with performance, right? If you don't know all the ins and outs of that aspect, then what do you have today? They're just going to look at you blankly. And that's part of the problem that we're discussing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think when you look at if you're migrating your existing kit, how many of us have oversized the resource on-prem because we're frightened of those help desk calls, and we give it a little bit extra, and we can because we've got that extra headroom on that virtual machine or that hardware, and we can squeeze some more in. That's not great when you're moving it, and that's where a lot of people think, oh, this server's got like 4 CPUs and 8 gig of RAM. It needs that in the cloud. Probably doesn't, because this bit of hardware you have on-prem is maybe 3-4 years old and is a good generation or two behind where the cloud is, and the cloud's using massively different generational hardware. So you can actually probably scale it back. So that's where people have to spend the time digging in and looking at performance graphs, you know, running things on your servers to see how hot they are running, how hot they're not running, understanding those workloads and doing all that investigation, both from a technology point of view and speaking to people who use these apps. You might find that they only use some kind of workload once a month, twice a month, that kind of stuff. So you need to be able to have mechanisms in place to scale that in the cloud better, because you don't want to pay for something that you don't need in the cloud ultimately.
Yeah, and just Sarah has such a great point there, that discrepancy between the kit that you have in your data center versus in the cloud. The other big thing is when you deploy it in your data center, that's where it's going to run for a number of years, as opposed to the cloud. You do have the opportunity that, hey, next month, next quarter, whenever that next generation piece comes out, do I resize that? Do I spend the time and effort to make some of those changes? The cloud has been making it easier to be able to adopt some of the newer generations of technology, but there's that constant okay, do I leave it running or do I go to the new feature? The thing that, I run into all the time with customers is just keeping up with all the different things that they have in the cloud and trying to know, do I optimize it or am I just spending too much time worrying about that? And if it's just going to save me, a couple of percentages of dollars every time, it might not be worth spending too much time looking at it, because you're not going to, I'll quote Corey Quinn, you're not going to, discount, save yourself a little bit of money, and that's not going to be the difference in your business. You want to have the agility and the speed of moving forward, not, spending all your time just looking at your infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yep. I've seen a lot of customers waste a lot of time trying to save £1 or $2 or $1 or $2 here, there, and you're like, you've got someone who's very technical, probably very expensive, is on a high wage, sitting there analysing costs so you can save $1 a month. Please don't do that. Like, do it every quarter, every 6 months. Don't do it every week, every month. It's just, you're not saving yourself any money. You're deluding yourself if you do that, to be quite honest.
Yeah. But you have put the tick in the box for the C-level exec to go, we are doing that. We're on top of that.
Yeah. And I guess just a high level point, something we're looking at is how much is it that you want to manage the infrastructure? Are there, I've got a database. I don't even want to have to worry about it. I just want to deploy that. At Red Hat, we've had a huge adoption of when people go to the cloud, they might have managed their Kubernetes environment with OpenShift in their data center. When they go to the cloud, oh, hey, wait, you've got an SRE team and can do that for us on Azure, on Microsoft, and the cost looks good. Hey, let me look at that and understand that. So, right, once again, free up your resources. And, we've got a team dedicated to working on that kind of activity so that you can go build your apps and focus on your business.
Yeah. And I can't focus on that more because I've perhaps got a bit of a perspective where looking at this from a startup sort of mentality and stuff, you have never enough time in the day. You might have money, but you don't have the resource at all, sort of thing. So even things like Kubernetes, for example, I was thinking, well, do I need Kubernetes or do I need something that will just run this container for me and I just plug it in and that is that, sort of thing? So for example, when I looked at Cloud Run and I was like, oh, so this container that I've got, I can just import it and it runs it and it bills me by the minute. Job done. That's ticked off my list. I can go revisit that, to Sarah's point. I could probably optimize it and build a Kubernetes infrastructure and stuff, but at the stage of business I'm in, it's not the right time for that project, for example. So it's great to have these different things where it's just focus on the value creation, because that's what's going to move the business valuation up. That's what's going to, make sure that that business survives and competes healthily against, an ever-changing world of far too many different competitors and apps and everything springing out left, right, all over the place. And it's a really interesting one that you raised there around how can you focus best on value creation. So yeah, absolutely. And there will come that point though where I think that it falls off the other end is you're paying a premium for that, right? And I pay a premium because it's in the safe hands of a provider, and I don't have to think about that. But then what if I had 500 of those? And now I'm at a point where my team needs to have that in that knowledge internally. And then if I had that knowledge internally, I could run it at 60% less cost per month, for example. That's where it starts to make a load of sense and stuff. So I say to everyone, whatever you choose now is not where you'll be in probably 12, 18, maybe 24 months. You've got to equip yourself so that you can make the right decisions as the life cycle of that application or workload evolves.
Yep. And to your point, training your staff is key to that development. I'm sure we've all went on these like week-long intensive courses where we learnt about, Exchange version or Windows Server or something like that, came away with a certificate, and then we were good for the next 3 or 4 years. And then we didn't have to do any more training. Ultimately, that's not the case where the industry is anymore. You have to support your staff in consistently learning, either giving them time to attend conferences and events like this, or giving them, credits inside a cloud provider so as they can go and have a play. They have an area to learn about. There's a different way you have to train. You have to try and manage that, because if you forget about training your staff, you're going to be stuck in that technology that you picked at the very start of your cloud journey and not evolve and not get the best benefit and not see your services grow and evolve and be competitive. That's probably some of the things that organizations are aiming towards. So I always stress to customers, training your staff is very much part of your cloud adoption journey, to be quite honest.
And the pace that cloud providers are just churning out features now is just relentless, right? I learn every single day. And, I work for one of the cloud vendors, and, I'm not an expert across most of the stuff that we do. However, I'm concentrated on certain areas, but even inside that learning curve is huge. So, to this point of someone from the external, trying to go in and do it, then you just need to be constantly learning.
Yeah. Were you always a kind of specialist, Darren, or were you a generalist and you've now specialised because the cloud's forced you to? Because that's been a tricky one for me to try and figure out, because I'm a generalist at heart.
Tend to lend my hand to most things, but no, security has been it was a side project through most of my career, so I kind of naturally fitted into it. Although the stuff that I work on now continually blows my mind every single day because it's on the Google core, and the performance is, yeah, it's off the scale. So, I'm still learning every single day with it as well. And internally, we have a lot of tooling, an awful lot of tooling. And to get your head around all that tooling and how to use it effectively does take a lot. But yeah, I'm more specialized now than I have been in the past, yeah, for certain. And I think that's healthy as well, because the GCP side, the customer engineers there, they will always pick 2 or 3 products that they are specialists in, because I don't think you could be you certainly can't be a specialist across all of it. And I think as techies, we like to specialize as well, don't we? Right? I mean, we like to have our areas or niche corners of real deep expertise, right? And well, that's why we're working these jobs.
But I think that's what a lot of people forget. You're often a generalist maybe when you're doing that on-prem environment, and then they expect people to be generalists in the cloud. But I think the last time I counted how many Azure services we had, we were over at 200. There's no way you can absolutely be a generalist in that. You're going to have, you might know the names, you might be able to list them if it was a game show, but there's no way you're going to be able to actually do that. And I think
a quick name and a guess of what it does.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's also a change in mindset on how you run your IT department, that you need maybe people that specialize, and then make sure that you bring them all together and they all work together and they talk together.
Yeah, I mean, Kirk, just the theme of our discussion here is the chaos. Is you need to be comfortable understanding that there's a lot that you're never going to know. I've talked to some of the smartest people at Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and even they, Swifty was saying, they don't know everything going on in their organization. You might have an area where you really understand that piece. So learning is different. It used to be, I learn a course, I understand it, I know this product inside and out, I can do everything with it. Here, you need to understand the learning process is a little bit different. You understand certain pieces, you understand where you plug in some other areas, and either in your organization or with your partners where you can plug into where they can help. So just, being able to be a little bit comfortable when it's uncomfortable, is okay in today's day and age.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're comfortable, you're not learning anymore, right? You're not pushing the boundaries. You're in a safe way until the next generation of stuff comes in, and then you're in a really bad place then, because you've got to skill up quickly. And this does feel like an ever speeding up conveyor belt of stuff at sometimes. So but I mean, going back to sort of the core of this, the chaos, and I suppose the bit of and how to avoid it. What sort of things then? So we spoke about costs, obviously, and performance. We'll do a little bit more about security and architecture as well. But what sort of tips would we say? We've got a lot of experience here. So for everyone in the audience, what sort of tips would you say? This is how, the simple things you can do to avoid a lot of this pain that we go there. And, let's scramble for whoever goes first and just roll with it.
I would selfishly say that security goes first and then everything else follows, but that's just myself. I still find it ironic that years and years ago we thought that the cloud was not secure enough, and now we're actually securing the cloud with the tooling in there. But I think if you if you have a security focused mantra when you're going into the cloud, then you'll have done a lot of that homework around what you see as the risks, where stuff should be going, where it needs to live, how do I secure it, how do I report on it. So I think having a security mindset, and feel free to shoot me down, actually focuses you to be a little bit more in detail before you just go start turning on services and then see what happens, right? And fix it after the fact once someone's exfiltrated data from you.
and yeah, security is multi-aspect, right? So a lot of people think of security as passwords and user accounts and probably, you know, IAM and things like that. But really, that doesn't tell you, you know, the weakest thing, and we were joking about this, right? The weakest thing of any organization, and I was speaking to a global hacker the other day, which is the interesting thing I get to do in this role, Mr. Mitnick. And he turned around and said, we can hack any organization, doesn't matter what you got. And I said, why? I said, humans. They are the weakest link. So if you have an organization with no humans, you'll be fine.
Well, that's the thing, though, isn't it? I mean, that, you know, they socially exploit them. And I know that I'm not going to bring up the topic of ransomware, but, you know, ransomware starts with someone targeting an end user. And that end user has to be compromised in a certain way. And then you've got initial access and lateral movement. And then you've given the keys to the kingdom to someone, right? And then you're broken then, right? But yeah, it's true. And I can't tell you how many customers I speak to, like on a daily basis, who have gone into a cloud and they've done it for data warehousing, analytics, you know, people who are not au fait with security. And we light up some of our stuff. And I'm like, oh, hey, did you know that like this person is dropping tables from here and then send them over there? They're like, no, we should probably have a look at that, right?
But to that point, though, you need to watch and have a good balance of security, because I've seen organizations where the security team say no consistently at everything and make you jump to this really, really, really high standard, and it ends up being a complete mess. And what you end up with is shadow IT. So I think there has to be a really good balance of what you need, and then what, you know, like how you say that. Like there'll be times you have to say no because someone's doing something really ridiculous, like opening port 3389 onto the internet and stuff like that. But there also needs to be a balance where you're not saying no all the time, because people will find a way around that. Like you say, humans will just find a way around that, and then you're even more of a mess because you have no idea what's happening. So I think there's a nice balance there to be had. But yeah, I think you're right in terms of security should be at the first part of your conversation.
I couldn't agree more. You can't be too strict with it. And we have a mantra that we try to make security invisible to the end users, because, you know, users don't want to use MFA. They find it annoying. You know, you have to make their journey as seamless as possible, but be secure as well. And it's a really, really difficult thing to achieve. It's not like you could just think of this in an evening and your company's going to have invisible security. It's never going to work. It takes a long time. It took us 7 years to refine our zero trust solution. I'm not joking. We designed a zero trust solution so that there is no difference between Google. There's no internal Google. It's completely on the internet.
Wow.
And that's a amazing. Complete zero trust. But that took Google 7 years from conception, and then building all of the infra around it so that we have security on users, but also on devices. And that's dynamic. So it's constantly updating. Did this user leave? When did they last log in? All the heuristics going in there determined where we can and can't get to.
So it would have taken
but it's completely invisible to us. We don't see or hear it.
But it probably would have taken 2 years before security got involved, right?
Yeah, someone came up with we're doing this.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, Stu, you look like you got something to say.
Yeah, no, just I mean, look, what Swifty said, totally. Security is everyone's responsibility, and we need to have it not just be the security team off slowing you down or saying no, but everybody gets involved in that. An area that we've really been emphasizing to people these days is you've gone beyond human scale on a lot of this, and to get to a zero trust model, you need automation involved in it. So much of the things, you know, you shouldn't have to be manually configuring things. You need to think about the long-term sustainability of how you're architecting. And so therefore security needs to be, you know, job zero. Automation should be part of everything you do holistically to look at your environment. It's going to save the sanity of your people. It's going to help your security posture, and it's going to once again allow you to focus on things that make more sense. So, it used to be kind of a point initiative that we did that, I scripted this, or I put in automation here, but holistically looking at how automation, the data heuristics, as we were talking about, can really shift the activity and the work that we do.
I remember,
if you're blueprinting everything all of the time, you've taken away all those concerns, haven't you?
Exactly.
And I think, to your point, Sarah, with like training, I think actually, whilst I'm thinking about it, I think automation and tooling should be one of the first things you consider, right, on that training, because you could probably make your life a hell of a lot easier at that point.
Yeah, and just one of those mind shift things, I remember early in my career, sometimes you go to an engineer and you're like, oh, we're going to automate. And you're like, you're taking my job away. The robots are coming. And it's like, yeah, okay. If you won't learn new things, if you're somebody that like fought against the cloud for years, you might be worried about your job going away. But if you can jump in, studies have shown, you need to have it's the people plus the technology together. Otherwise, we'll always beat, the technology alone or people alone. So that's just so hugely important that get on ball. I know I've had times in my career where it's like, oh, that's a little scary. Maybe, my value to the organization will go away. Well, what if I dive in and understand it better? Because then, I'm even more valuable.
Yeah. I always used to treat it as I spend less time doing the stuff that bores me and more time doing the stuff that excites me. And the company obviously benefits from that, right? Because there are those organizations that you're here to do just this job and here's your box and you live in it. And we all know where those companies tend to go after a certain amount of time. Whereas the other ones are like, oh, amazing. So you, by the end of like year one, you're doing, the job spec is like 20% of what you do. You're doing the 80% that you want to do, that's developing you, but the company benefits. And a lot of that, like you say, is challenging the norm. So it gives you that experience, right, to avoid chaos in the first place, because you've probably been able to very quickly. And one of the huge advantages of any cloud is, and it doesn't matter if it's, for everyone here, just clear, when I'm saying cloud, obviously a lot of people automatically think an Azure, an AWS, or GCP. I'm also thinking, well, that cloud-like feel that you can do on premise now, on premises, and it's just like, well, okay, well, I can fire something up and kill it very quickly without spending having to image a server and download an ISO and this and that. It's just, here it is, and it's really painless, really, from that perspective. And you go into cows versus pets or cattle and things like that. Whatever it is these days. And I think that whole thing of now being able to try things and fail fast without going too far down the line of, oh, now I'm in real chaos here and there's no way out. We've got to try and fix something that's fundamentally broken. I haven't seen many of those projects that I've worked like over the last few years. I see people bail out quite quickly and try new things. I'm not sure what your experience is.
You got to hand it out as well. I mean, cloud's enabled us all to be hands-on technically. I mean, prior to that, unless you worked in that company and you had a specific job role, then there's probably very little chance you'd get your hands on that technology. And now anyone with a credit card, can get online and go and try whatever takes your fancy, right? And that drives this knowledge base and these features. And I think it's a good thing.
Yep, it's definitely more accessible, because Kurt's got one in his background there, one of those wee microservers, which I used to have as well, because that was how you would learn technology, and it would be a complete slog, because you'd probably be sharing like 8 gig of RAM for like 12 VMs, and you'd be sitting there. The cloud's made it more accessible for us to learn, for us to try things, for us to scale up as techies, and not have to, fork out for that microserver that's really a nice bit of kit, but also complete pain to run when you actually are trying to scale up and learn. So yeah, you're completely right.
I think I've got two nooks behind me that have not seen the light of day for years.
Oh, brilliant. So we went through there. We went through, okay, listen, people can certainly go a long way in educating them, in making sure that they have the capacity to do their jobs well with, not the freedom to do anything they want, but in a controlled manner that makes sure your data is not getting out onto the internet, that they're not exposing PCI sensitive data to the public, for example, because they left a bucket with the wrong policy on, for example, or anything like that. And then also, like you mentioned, there is the team. I think a team is a big thing. Rarely is this a one person thing, right? We spoke about a person independently, but what sort of tooling, what sort of things are we seeing here? I mean, I'm going to throw one straight into the mix that's changed my entire career, which is something like a GitHub, for example, one of many. Okay, others exist. I'll do the British thing. But, you know, that changed the world for me, because it's like, oh my God, look at all this work everyone else has done that I can use to accelerate the other stuff I've done. But now in chaos land and security land is, have I gone through every single line that they've got, and what does it do behind the scenes, and this and that. And modern apps, you know, I only have to look at one of the apps I've developed here. There's probably about 72 dependencies on it. And something like GitHub tells me, oh, by the way, there's a CVE on this bit. And I love that. So, yeah. I mean, what sort of things are you seeing that people with modern architectures, like whether it be mobile apps, whether it be web apps, so that's how do you even control that and as a team?
There's a great meme for that. So there's a guy who says, where do you get your code from? And he wheels in a giant giraffe, and it's made up of all different animal parts that he's stolen from the internet. Yeah, and he's like, there's my code.
Yeah, I've seen that one. That was brilliant.
I'll just say, Kirk, you know, you talk about, you know, we've got a number of customers that are early going down the GitOps path. So, you know, how do I do all of my, you know, code management and change control and everything? Well, you know, I do it as code, and therefore it's checked in, and, you know, it's tough to mess things up, because if somebody goes, it checks and makes sure, is it the right version? You know, when we move to new versions, it takes care of that. So, you know, leveraging the tools to take advantage of it. And, you know, I'm sure Swifty could do a long discourse on us. You know, from a security standpoint, we need to be able to be up on the newer version and need some central piece, because otherwise every group does their own thing. And are they up to date? Do they manage it? No, you know, going to the new version's tough. So, you know, my friends in security always were like, you know, anything we can do to have them, you know, be up to date faster. So it goes along that path that we've been on with DevOps to, you know, hey, update faster, push code, you know, take advantage of it. We're going to be more secure over time.
Yeah.
And I think
sorry, go ahead.
I think that plays into a part, because this kind of infrastructure as code or GitOps or something, I always thought as an IT pro that wasn't something that I should be involved in, because I'm the server hugger traditionally. You know, I shouldn't be looking at what the developer tools are. And I used to be thinking that GitHub and Git and Azure DevOps and Jenkins and all those things were developer tools only. And I think, again, that comes back to these tools have to be part of everybody's job now. You know, as an IT pro, you have to learn how to use Git, because you might have to go and check in some code, whether that be PowerShell scripting or something. You know, everybody has to be involved in this. It's a big community that builds this cloud for an organization. So there shouldn't be any tools that are developer only or IT pro only and things like that. That's just my little shout out to the IT pro audience to avoid chaos.
I couldn't agree. And I think all these pillars are kind of leading into, you know, this is a cloud culture first, isn't it? It is, one doesn't go without the other. Our industry flipped on its head in the space of a decade, basically. And it hit a lot of people in the face quite quickly in terms of, oh, there's the storage person, and there's the DBA, and I rarely see that segmentation anymore. There's the cloud architects, and they do almost 90% of everything, and you may have your specialists there, sort of thing, and then there's security. For some reason, there's the security. That is all they do.
And one guy, a guy will go, and everyone goes, we'll have to get security to look at this.
Yeah.
Well, Kirk, I just want to pull on one thread that you had there, because, you know, we've had such a move in the last decade talking about cloud and public cloud. Well, security, automation, skills, and everything. It's not just the place there, but it is that operational model. So we've had the modernization, what we're doing in the data center, much of that is shifting, but edge is something that, you know, we've really started to see the rollout. All the public cloud providers are working with their solutions and with their partners. And if you think about, you know, the security implications of, you know, I'm now going to have thousands of devices everywhere, and there's not going to be people there. So everything we talked about, automation and skill set and things like that need to set up. Red Hat, we've been working really to extend everything we've been doing with Linux and containers and Kubernetes to get in those environments. And we're partnering with the cloud providers to get there. So again, when it talks about chaos, hopefully what we've been doing for the last decade sets us up. And if you're listening to the trends and doing it, hopefully, don't be scared. Yes, there are some challenges, but we're going to build on what we had and be able to iterate on it.
You make a great point as well, Stu, with the edge. And I know we've been talking about IoT for years. It seems to be like every vendor's buzzword, but like 5G is now here. But I'm regularly having calls now with people with devices out there that they need to think about securing and think about how they automate, think about how they roll this out. And I think you're absolutely spot on with the skills that you kind of acquire with being a cloud architect is you are across quite a lot of it, but you get to think programmatically about all this stuff. So I think we're well tooled for that, but it does still scare me.
Well, you're not doing your job if you don't instill a little bit of fear in us as a security person, right?
Yes.
I'm going to go review all my security policies now.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So yeah, I think we've pretty much touched on everything I can think of there in terms of what can constitute chaos. And I think for anyone watching, chaos can manifest in multiple ways. And in a way, a little bit of chaos is okay because it means you're pushing the boundaries, you're pushing the envelope, you're doing new things. But like everyone agreed here, as long as you're making the right bets in your tooling, your education of the humans that are there to run the magic of the cloud, whether it's in the cloud or here or there or anywhere, because cloud, as Stu rightly points out, cloud is everywhere now. Cloud came, changed everything, introduced some really innovative architectures, brought Kubernetes and things to life. And then basically we saw all those best practices coming back into some legacy architecture that should have died a long time ago. And then now we see these modern architectures, that different ways of building everything, just regardless of location, on the edge, in the cloud, in the core. And we're faced with how do we get a strategy to control all of it? And I think we've touched upon pretty much everything you need there. So your costs in terms of understanding those, reading the devil of the detail, from a performance perspective, making use of the tools that are there. And also, again, if you don't, you're going to see that in costs anyway, because you pay a premium for performance regardless, right? But also performance, one thing I wanted to mention was also the architecture piece that got mentioned. ARM's here, and that is changing a hell of a lot of stuff. Like my processes now run 80% faster at half the cost. So one for another session, I'll talk about architectures because we're getting close to the top. But as we're close to the top, any parting sort of single bullet points from you as we work around the screen? So I'll just fire across. Sarah, any last topic of wisdom for anyone?
Just sit down and do the planning, those boring meetings, sit down and do them, because they will be worth it. Absolutely.
Darren?
Cloud isn't going to catch on. I'm joking. No, I think I'll tell you the security angle with that one is always think of security, and there is no shortage of logging in the cloud. Make use of that tooling, understand it. You have a vast wealth of information available.
Awesome, and thanks for that. And Stu?
Don't let the chaos stop you from moving forward. You need to make a plan. You need to stick to it. You can iterate and adjust after time, but there's always going to be new things popping up. And again, you need to get down that path, and then you can adjust over time. But don't let it freeze you where you need to be going.
Love it. That's absolutely great advice. So I'd like to take all of that and just say to everyone, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for watching us and joining this session of Cloud Chaos and how to avoid it. Hopefully you've learned something and enjoy